Howdy, welcome. Let's get deer geeky right now. I've got my glasses on. I've got my water. Today we're going solo for podcast, Deer Talk Now podcast number 67. Thank you for joining us. My name is Daniel Schmidt with Deer and Deer Hunting. This is the 67th episode of this podcast. We appreciate you for joining us, and all we ask you to do is like and subscribe. That's all we ask you to do wherever you're listening to this podcast or watching this podcast. If you want to watch them all, they're on YouTube, they're on Facebook. If you want to listen to them, any podcast platform, they are there. Welcome again. I'm going solo today. Today I'm going to get geeky. I know I do this probably once every other month, and we're going to talk about something that is near and dear to my heart, and I'm going to try not to overwhelm you with too much information. This is about FAWN recruitment. So, Ian, I'm going to ask you, Ian's my crack producer. I'm going to ask you to start this off, when was or is deer hunting's glory years as far as deer numbers go?
I don't know. I'm young, so from my point of view, I would probably like the Larry Benoit, like the 60s, 70s kind of era. I think right at the end of this tail end of the 70s is probably were like the glory days. That's what I would.
The fact that you're referencing Benoit is, I tip my hat to you. That's impressive. I love that. If any of you listeners, viewers don't know who Larry Benoit was, one of the greatest deer hunters in America. Outdoor Life crowned him as the greatest deer hunter in America on a cover of Outdoor Life in 1970. But not to burst your bubble, no, that's not correct. As far as deer numbers go and deer opportunity. Now, I know I always have to preface this, but for me, I always do it by numbers. You know me, I'm a numbers guy as far as that stuff goes. Baseball statistics, I can bore you to death with baseball statistics, and I can bore you to death with deer statistics as far as harvest numbers go. But if we look at harvest numbers and harvest opportunity across North America, particularly the United States, obviously, the glory days were 1995 to 2005, that 10-year period as far as harvest goes. Next question you're going to ask is, why is that? That's when there was the perfect storm of opportunity hunter numbers and just really the relaxation of antlerless harvest. So it's kind of like when they took off the gloves and say, have at it. I remember 1996 specifically here in our home state, where they basically said you could kill as many does as you want. And boy, did we do it. I mean, it was so much fun. I was like, I think I averaged for 20 years double digits with my bow on does, and it was so much fun. We promoted it, and nationwide it was needed because, the whitetail population at that point had grown so significantly. You can ask why that is. The perfect storm for the most part was mild winters in the early 1990s, and then that El Nino effect lasted for almost 20 years. So we didn't have the broad brush. We didn't have the widespread deer yarding in wintertime because the snow depths weren't that great. The harsh winters weren't that terrible. Yes, there was one or here or there, but we had incredible fawn recruitment. So we had really good cover, overwinter cover in most northern regions, and tremendous fawning cover across the country, and those things, and low predator numbers because everybody trapped. Predator management was at an all-time high. Fur prices were high. That's when the Chinese market basically went through the roof, and people were selling furs and trapping, and so there was all these things came together. Whitetail population was great. Got up to, I think it was 32, 34 million deer in America. For perspective, at the turn of the century, there's only 500,000, so everything was peaking. Where do we sit today? We are, if you read any of these headlines, we're in trouble in some states with fawn recruitment. Is it apocalypse now? No, it's not, but I'm going to get into that, and we're going to talk about. So let me back up, and I'm going to define what is fawn recruitment. Fawn recruitment is the percentage of fawns that survive to 6 months of age. So once they're born in April, May, June, in some southern states later, and they get to 6 months, that's biologically speaking the doe raised a fawn to 6 months. Whether it survives the hunting season or not, another thing to be seen, but that's basically the definition. What is the average? Let me ask you that, Ian. Not to give you this pop quiz. So you're like my guinea pig here. What is the average fawn recruitment on good habitat? So how many fawns should a doe have to survive to 6 months on good habitat?
I'm gonna say 3 to 4.
No, I'm sorry, I put you in that spot. The average fawning rate is one fawn per one adult doe. So like if you average things out, I'll give you some numbers here. And that's not wrong because, most people think like twins, they see a doe with twins and they're like, oh yeah, every doe's going to have twins. No, it's not. It's not. If you average things out, I'm going to give you, we'll go across habitat. So 3 things you've got, I basically break it down to 3 different types of habitat. So you have farmland habitat, forested habitat. That would be just like regular, like interspersed farmland with forest, and then big woods. So then big woods would be, if you're thinking of, there's a lot of states with big woods, and it's not just the northern tier. You've got places in Missouri and stuff with big woods, but mostly like Minnesota, Wisconsin, Michigan, New York, Pennsylvania, Maine, Vermont, even Connecticut. You think of some big woods environments. But let's start with farmland, because farmland, most people know. Historically, a fawning rate there is going to average over, if you do a 30-year span, it's going to be anywhere from 0.8 to 1.2. So 0.8 on the low side, so less than 1 fawn per doe, to 1.2, meaning that it's not a preponderance of fawns, but there's more fawns than singles or none. The average in a farmland is 0.9. So the average in most farmland is 1 fawn per 1 adult doe. In forested habitat, middle tier terrain, your average is going to be 0.6 to 1.1. So pretty close, but a little bit lower, with an average of 0.8, just a notch lower than the 0.9 in farmland. In big woods would be obviously understandable. Big woods, you've got big woods, which is predominantly crappy deer habitat because it doesn't get managed. It's a lot of national forest. It's a lot of old growth forest with not a lot of understory, not a lot of deer food. So big woods, the average is 0.4 to 0.8 with an average of 0.6. So if you look at, which makes sense because if you've ever hunted the big woods, which I did for over 20 years, you don't see a lot of deer. Deer densities are low. So if you're looking at that, it's like a half of a fawn per doe average is what your recruitment rate is. So of all those fawns being born, not a lot of them are surviving. So that's average. So what I did is I went back, I've got historical data from lots of states, and that's the average across the country. Before I move on to explain that, the narrative for fawns, for whitetails, it's called the boys and girls narrative. So if you look at any state's population of fawns, this is something I find curious and interesting because a lot of people don't understand it. So they think like, oh, we're trying to manage our deer herd and, we want more bucks than does and blah, 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 blah. Fawns are just like human children. I hate using those analogies, but they are born in almost equal ratios. So if you go across the board, if you have 100 fawns, approximately 50 of them are going to be female, 50 of them are going to be male. Yes, it's a little bit up and down, but for all intents and purposes, the boys and girls narrative is the same. It's 50-50. So the ones that survive, you'll have 50 males, 50 females, and how that shakes out, really comes along on your recruitment, because if you have really low recruitment, you're going to have fewer bucks and you're going to have fewer does. The fewer bucks is going to get the hunters riled up because it's like, well, we hardly seen any bucks. Well, that's because your recruitment is pretty low. And your overall population isn't going to grow if you have a very low recruitment because other things come into play. So what influences fawn recruitment? Okay, another pop quiz for you, Ian. I've got three things that are the most influencers on fawn recruitment. What would you say is number one? I have to do this to.
I'm just gonna say food, predator or pressure from predators, and then the third one I'd probably, man, that sounds so choppy here, but maybe weather, or maybe even just social. I'm gonna go with my third one for social. So something to do with social behavior.
Social stress. That's actually a really good guess, but that's not right. But the other two are right in the ballpark. Food isn't so much food. Predators is number 2. And I ask this a lot. I used to, when I did my speaking engagements, I would ask people this question, and it wasn't to try to fool them. It was just to try to get them to think, because if I tell you the answer is cover, number 1. And that really flips the script, because people think, oh, it's predators. Coyotes and wolves are killing all these fawns.
Right.
That's number 2. Number 1 and number 2 are cover. So 1, people will argue against number 2. Number 2, I say, is predators, but let me just go through them. Number 1 is fawning cover. So that is the cover in the woods right now from, just say, when things green up. So let's just say from April through September. Fawning cover. So what is fawning cover? Good, thick fawning cover that's got a lot of edge cover. Because, deer are creatures of the edge. Fawns are small. They have to learn their way following mom for the first weeks and months of their lives. They need really good hiding cover to survive. So, and I'm going to get to the remedies and everything later, but number 1 is fawning cover. Number 2 would be predation. A close number 3, which I would argue could be number 2, is overwinter cover, which is a huge problem in the north for whitetails, in the fact on how deer survive. So once we do get a bad winter, which deer are going to die? The young and the weak, and mostly the young. So the fawns are going to, if we don't have good overwinter cover, those deer will die in winter. I mean, not 100%, but the rates, the preponderance is going to be higher for fawns. So I'll go through that a little bit. I got to back up here, because I've got a lot I want to go through. Those are the things that influence fawning recruitment more than anything else. If we look at predation, we've talked about this, I think, on some of these podcasts, but coyotes, number 1, black bears, number 2. Everything else, I would say, is incidental unless you live in wolf country, and maybe mountain lions in some western states. But for the most part, for most people listening to this podcast, watching this podcast, it's going to be coyotes. And there's huge problems across the country with coyote populations and fawn recruitment, and I'm going to get to that as well. So how do we improve the fawn recruitment? Well, as I already told you, the biggest problems are cover and predation. So if we look at cover, the thing I should really warn people is this is nothing you can do to fix on your own. You can't fix fawn recruitment on your 40 or your 80 acres or even your 1,000 acres, really. I mean, okay, if you own 1,000 acres of prime deer habitat, and it might be one person listening to this podcast, could you potentially affect fawn recruitment in a positive way? Yes, you could, if you had unlimited time and money. Yes, you probably could. Can you influence it on your small properties? Not necessarily, but it takes a village to fix the problem. And that's the thing that I would stress for everybody is don't always think in terms of how can I fix this? Just say, how can I help? And if you do that, some of the things you can do on your property, again, this would be somebody managing private lands, some things you can do and some things you should just be ingrained in your head as a hunter and a conservationist, that if that wears off on your neighbors, it wears off on your family members, you're basically leaving behind a good legacy as a conservationist. So that's how I have to preface that. Work on the cover, number one. And that could be on your private land, or it could be you lobbying your legislators on public land management, because public land management, let's face it, is not geared towards single species for deer, much less even secondary. They're not thinking about it, and they need to be. For fawning cover, I'm going to say there's probably 3 ways you can fix it, or I shouldn't say fix it, 3 ways you can help it. And that would be through cutovers, clear cuts, cutovers, fire. They use fire a lot in the Southeast, and it's really helping. Fire helps regenerate those native grasses, the native vegetation. It's creating nice, thick understory cover for fawning cover in the spring and summer. And then edge cover is kind of goes hand in hand with both of those. But edge cover would be, I know a lot of guys who do it with basically just cutting maybe access roads into cutovers. And that edge cover really, comes back in berry brush. It comes back in sumac, wing sumac around here. It comes back in different things that really help provide the cover, but also provide what you got to Ian there before was food. It's providing a lot of food, succulent green vegetation. When those fawns they're still nursing with their mothers, but they're becoming full-fledged ruminants within a couple weeks. So that really helps. The key on any property, if you're managing it for deer, is diversity. Don't always think in the fact of hunting, and I know we do get wrapped up in that. We think, where can I put a food plot? And that's great. That's wonderful to put in extra stuff. But diversity is a big thing. What do you have for cutovers? What do you have for... How is your forest? Is your forest sickly? I know a buddy of mine, he owns some land just south of us here, and we went in there and looked at it. It was all mature black locust, which is highly invasive, chokes out all the understory. There's no cover there whatsoever. So what he's doing is going in, he enlisted the help of state forester, and they're going in there to manage that, which is wonderful because he's looking at some really good bedding cover that is going to be taken away from basically being a dead sea now to being able to support more deer and hopefully, holding more deer in the spring. Deer Talk Now is brought to you by Full Range Mounting Systems. These mounting systems are a great way to manage all of your mounts in a stylish and organized manner. We are using their pedestal mount here on the podcast set for 2 shoulder mounts, and it looks just awesome. Be sure to check out their mounting systems at fullrangesystems.com, and for 15% off your order, use code DTN. So if you're going to address your management strategies from that aspect, I've got 1, 2, 3, I think 5 or 6 points here. Managed forest programs, look at them in your state. Most states have them. A state forester, they're public employees, they're there to help you. So look at a managed forest program if you have private land. And they're going to help you. And you just say, hey, I want to create more cover here. I want to create more edge habitat. And that helps more than just deer. That helps all wildlife, and they'll be happy to help you with that. Cover enhancement, talked about that. How can you improve the cover through some of these practices like cutovers, fire, invasive species management. We've talked about that on Deer Talk before. Lots of invasive species, no matter what state you're in. Are there things that you can do to help minimize them or even eliminate them in some cases, which you can. It takes a little bit of sweat equity, or you could hire somebody to do it. Very easy to do. Edge species management. So identifying, if you guys go to the Facebook page, I just posted one on black privet. I mean, you look at some of these weeds and forbs, they call it black clover, but I mean, there's some native species that with just a little bit of work, you can help improve that. And that's better than a food plot, because if you have native species that deer are eating and you know how to identify it, that's going to help with your edge species management. And it doesn't require really that much work. It just know what you're looking at. Invasive species management, talked about that. They do what they call the hack and squirt and spring all over the place, where they're trying to get rid of honeysuckle and locust and kudzu and all sorts of stuff like that, where they're cutting and spraying it with herbicides. That works. I've seen a lot of people do it. A lot of guys with some of these management channels are doing it very well. And then timber stand management, going in, and that really requires a forester. I don't know how to do it from a forest health standpoint. These guys, these foresters really know what they're looking at, and they look at long range plans. They're not looking at 5 years. They're looking at 20, 40, 80 years on the health of that forest. So that's a timber stand management thing is really going to be helpful. And then thermal cover in winter is huge. In the north, in the south, and the southeast, no, you don't have to worry about that, obviously. But thermal cover, how do you fix it? How do you improve it? And is there anything you can do about it? Fragmentation of property is huge. It's hurt deer management, but there's certain things you can do to help with thermal cover. I'm not talking about bringing back deer yards because that's a bigger problem. That has to be tackled by region. But individually, you can work on that. So, okay, let me go back to we talked about what recruitment is, what we can do about it, what we can't do about it. And to go along with the forestry talk right there, what's causing it? Okay, so when we look at some of those four things expanded a little bit, predators, there's more predators, fragmented habitat, poor habitat, just talked about that, and exploitation of the doe herd. That's a big one that I think a lot of people don't understand, and I know we talked about this again, but I know the QDM guys are going to get upset with me, but the proliferation of the idea that every property is a good property and, oh my God, we have to hammer these doe herds has infiltrated our ranks across the country, and it's really hurt over the past 25 years. So what's happened there is it was basically everybody saying, kill more does, kill more does, kill more does. You're going to have better buck hunting in fall. Keep that population low. Admirable to a point, but some people have, in good areas, have done it too well. And then in other areas where hunter populations are higher and predator populations are higher, it's gotten really bad. And that's where we're seeing the problem. So the problem is, I'm going to list a couple states here. The people that are really seeing problems with fawn recruitment: Alabama, Georgia, Florida, Kansas, Maine, Virginia, Southeast states specifically, Mississippi, Louisiana. Maine is a big one. So you'd say, well, why is that? Because what's happened is, and I'm not blaming this completely on, QDM, so to speak, but that mentality of bringing these doe herds down, because this gets complicated. So it's like if you have let's say you have a really robust deer herd, and you've got, let's just, for all intents and purposes, you guys have heard me talk about this before, 35 deer per square mile is maximum for the best habitat. Well, we know areas that had 75, 100 deer per square mile. Boom, 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 boom. I said, when people get to 35, they're going to think you killed all the deer. You get to some of these places where they didn't have those they thought they did. They didn't have those populations. You brought those populations below maximum carrying capacity. And now you had predators that were already there that took advantage of it. So basically the predators are controlling that deer herd, bringing it down. The recruitment is really low because the predators are coyote especially, are so efficient at killing fawns. And then to compound that is the average age of a mature doe has gone down. So before that, if we go back in time to say 30, 40, 50 years ago, our grandfathers knew what they were talking about, and we kind of made fun of them. The old adage of, oh, you kill a doe, you take a cow out of the barn and pretty soon you don't have a farm no more. That was one of the things where they say you don't kill the doe. No, we don't kill the does around here, Junior. No, we don't do that. And it was a sacred cow. Nobody killed does. What happened was, okay, so if you were looking at those populations, and I know I'm going to bore you to death with this, but you know how I tell you how does live on the population, on the landscape? Connected circles of maternally linked groups. So if you look at that magical square mile, it's circle, 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 and all these does that are living across the landscape, the healthy mature does have the high rent areas, the really good habitat, and then those yearling does get pushed out and they have to disperse to the low rent areas, the crappy habitat, like we have here outside the office, where you can kill a yearling doe, but you're setting your clock every September 17th, So what happened was you had an age structure that was all of a sudden taken down over, like I say, the past decade or two, taken down to a very low level. So to put this in a perspective, and I'm going to use another human analogy for you, it would be like if you took, oh, this is a bad human analogy. I'm not going to use that. If you took all those prime mothers out of the equation, now all the mothers are basically young teenagers running around, not knowing what they're not experienced mothers. So what's happening is, well, how does that affect fawn recruitment? It affects it a lot because you got coyotes embedded in that population that are basically going after deer that are easier to kill because you've got yearling does, trying to be the matriarchs of these doe groups, maybe a 2-year-old doe. And, all the ones around the other side are like, they're kind of running around like crazy. Maybe those, it's not uncommon for a yearling doe to only have one fawn. So if the preponderance of the fawns being born are being born to these inexperienced mothers, chances are those are the fawns that are going to get picked off by coyotes. So if you look at like Virginia's terrible. If you look, okay, so I'm going to give you 1, 2, 3, 4 states. Virginia's on here, but I don't know if I wrote it down. I don't think I did. Let me just look here quick. I didn't. But if you look at Georgia, Louisiana, Maryland, and New Hampshire. So 2 of those states in the southeast, Georgia, Louisiana. They went from average recruitment rates, stay with me here, average recruitment rates from 0.7, which is, a little bit less than what we had. We had 0.9, 0.7 fawns per doe, adult doe, down to 0.4. So it's cut almost in half over the past 20 years. New York State, which is going to blow your mind, they're down in most areas of New York State down to 0.3. So basically, 0.3 of a fawn per doe. Why is that? For the most part, you got a lot of that Adirondack-ish, big wood stuff. And then in the farmland, it just wasn't high deer densities to begin with. New York's not a good example. I wish I had Virginia's numbers here. I don't. But Virginia, Mississippi, the Carolinas, Georgia, they're really dealing with this. Now, am I pinning the whole problem on the fact that hunters went out and killed all these does? No, that's just, like I said, it compounds the problem. But it compounds the problem. Leopold taught us this in the 1930s. So basically he said, there's going to be a day of reckoning if you put on your blinders and say, I want as many deer as possible on this landscape because I want to have maximum hunting opportunities. Eventually, there's going to be a law of diminishing returns because your cover has been degraded. The deer have basically eaten themselves out of house and home. Maybe the population has been artificially inflated through baiting and feed, not baiting so much, but like artificial feeding or mild winters. So you have a mild winter and you got people putting out supplemental feed, growing crops just for deer. I'm not blaming anybody for it, but you have a lot more food. You have mild winters. You're keeping that population up here. Okay, now something goes awry, aka a really harsh winter. Boom, that population drops, or predators get in there, kill a bunch of fawns. That population drops. Can that population rebound quickly? No, it can't. Can it rebound? Yes, it can, but it's going to take a concerted effort by improving cover, improving habitat, improving food sources, getting, there's so many prongs to this effort that there's not just a silver bullet to say, oh, we're going to do this and it's going to make it all hunky-dory again and we're going to have 1.2, 1.3. I remember a year where our average recruitment was 1.3, which was la la land because it's like, it shouldn't be that because things are going to even themselves out. So, yes, recruitment rates have plummeted. Breeding rates have plummeted. So if we look at breeding rates, you're going to say, well, how is that possible? Well, know what I told you about if you have an average doe herd where that average mature doe is, 2 years old, should the breeding rates be lower? No, but if you looked at the old school population of antlerless deer, you had a lot of highly mature deer, 5, 6, 7, 8, 10-year-old does who are still popping out 2 fawns each. But you also had a preponderance of the doe fawns giving birth. Yes. So if you looked at in a lot of these areas, mostly in the Midwest and the North, if you had a well-nourished fawn, doe fawn, that fawn would be giving birth next year. Chances are it would be giving birth to a single. And there has been research saying that a lot of those singles were skewed more towards males, which was great. And if you looked at Northwoods environments, that's when the whole sex age kill thing took off, because that's what people wanted. They wanted to hunt bucks. They didn't care how big they were. We just want bucks. The doe population was robust. The diversity of the age structure was very good. So you had better production for breeding rates. So all that stuff goes hand in hand. And when I look at this stuff, I say, I know I get geeky and I'm talking and I'm not stopping, but if you don't believe in God, I don't know what else to tell you, because look at this stuff and how this works. This is unbelievable, the way that this stuff works. And we can't, like I said, there's no crystal ball. There's no magic thing to wave a wand and say, this is how we fix it. There's a lot of moving parts to it. If we look at recruitment, so is that all gloom and doom? It kind of might sound that way. Recruitment is decent in the traditional whitetail states. I feel really bad for our friends in the Southeast because they have a problem that needs to be addressed. And like I said, there's 12 states down there. There's, like I said, Louisiana, Arkansas, Florida is terrible. Their black bear population is through the roof. You can't hunt them. Northern Florida, I feel bad for those guys. They have not only black bears, they have hogs. Yeah. So, I mean, it's really bad.
Alabama, too. Alabama bad.
Alabama's getting bad. So now you enter those predators in there, they're opportunists. And now you've got terrible, I mean, I don't want to say terrible, but you've got really degraded habitat overrun by predators. In Florida's case, you can't hunt them. And now what I say is put on the brakes, but I'm going to get to that in a second. The recruitment is decent. Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin. When you're looking at a fawn recruitment rate of, 0.8, 0.9, it's almost right at 1. 1 is ideal. I mean, if you go back in the history and you look at it, there were years when it was 1 point, pushing 1.2, sometimes even higher than that, blips. Like, man, that's awesome. It's not going to stay there. If you can be anywhere near 1, you're doing good. Those states are doing it pretty well. Our friends in the Southeast are hurting. Our friends in the Northeast are hurting. And some of our friends in the West are hurting. And that has a lot more to do with predators than it does cover, because if you look at states we travel to each year, like Nebraska and Wyoming, those places are dealing with cats, but they're also dealing with severe weather. I mean, they are dealing with severe drought, and that's really tough on a fawn. And even in Texas, they've had prolonged droughts in areas. But so what can we do? If you have coyotes, you need to address it, and I know they're doing this in the Southeast. Should you go coyote hunting? Yeah, absolutely. But it's got to be more than that. If you're not enlisting a full scale, if I was a property owner, let me just put it this way. If I was a property owner hunting in the Southeast, I would be enlisting either, if I'm doing it myself or I'm hiring or letting somebody do it for me, just a sustained year-round coyote trapping program is what I would be doing. And I know that's what they're doing, because will it cure anything? No, it's not. It's not going to cure. If they put their foot on the gas, they keep that pedal down forever, they can help manage it. Because coyote, I think we talked with that with somebody on the program. You can bring. It's really weird when I talked about the whole. I know I get spiritual on here, but we go out and we kill all these coyotes. We go out and kill all these raccoons. Guess what Mother Nature does? She programs those things to now where pup litter sizes are doubled, So there's research out there that shows, like, if you really highly exploit either a coyote population, any population, a coyote population, a raccoon population, any predator population, the ones that survive, they might not be having 4 or 5 pups. They might be having 8 or 10.
Why is that?
It's just Mother Nature's way of knowing that, like, something's going on here. This is like last man on Earth. So Mother Nature, God's waving his wand and saying, well, they're trying to wipe you off the face of the earth, so now we're going to try to put more out there. I don't understand it, but there is research to prove it.
Interesting.
And I know it with raccoons personally, because I'm trying to wipe raccoons off the face of my little piece of paradise, because I want to try to save more turkeys. And the turkey population, that would be another podcast that we should get one of these, our friends from the Turkey Association on, because it's the same thing with raccoons. The ones that are surviving are having larger litter sizes, and that's what's happening with coyotes. But the biggest thing is with coyotes, if you're going to be proactive on it by yourself, don't think that, hey, I'm going coyote hunting and I shot a coyote. That's awesome. I love it. I mean, I congratulate anybody who does it. But if you're trying to do it from helping the deer population perspective, if you don't trap, let trappers on your property, and don't be afraid. Trappers are a deer hunter's best friend. They're a turkey hunter's best friend. Can hunting and trapping coexist? Absolutely.
They should.
I mean, it could be like, hey, you guys want to come in here January, February, March, knock yourself out.
Yep.
Do whatever you want. Obviously respect my fences and close my gates, but I would allow people to do it for free. If I had that much land, you want to come out here and trap till your heart's content. Because that will help.
Yeah.
Definitely will help. And I know some of the deer managers, these really geeky guys, they're awesome big buck hunters. We know them. They enlist some just serious trapping initiatives, and they make a dent on their property. And like I said, it takes a village. So if you can enlist your neighbors to do it, or maybe encourage your neighbors, like, hey, if you're not going to do it, I know so-and-so is a trapper. I would enlist that. And I know you lived in Florida. They're having their problems with hogs.
Yeah.
And they can't. That's like taking a bucket of sand off the beach, because
they can't keep up with it.
No, they can't. So they're trying to poison them and do all this other stuff. And I remember our friend Hoppy Kempfer, who lives down there. He said it's like a wave of sadness that goes across the state when hogs get entrenched in your area. He said basically it's like, fold up the doors, it's done, because it's like, because it's they're taking everything out. I mean, hogs are going to wreck, turkeys and small game and even deer,
right?
But then they just destroy the habitat.
So to these people in the Southeast, because how about this? To the people that are in these situations where they are out of control, they're completely helpless, like Florida with the black bear situation. They cannot hunt the black bears, but they're wreaking havoc on the deer population, or like the fawn population in Florida. What do we say to those people? What, like you said, there's no crystal ball, there's no wave of the wand that we can give them, but what steps can they take to kind of,
in that one in particular, in Florida's case in particular, and I know this applies to, that's with black bears. This would apply to places with cat populations. It's a tough road, but they need to lobby their lawmakers. To Florida in particular, hunters need to put the pressure on their lawmakers to get a black bear season in there, and something that's more, I mean, getting any kind of season in there would help, but something needs to be done to manage that. I mean, you're managing a natural resource.
Yep.
And people say, "Oh, I love bears." So do I. I love bears. It's just like we love mountain lions. We love timber wolves. There's nothing to say that we don't love those animals, but they need to be managed like everything else. And I can't remember what the latest estimate was. I think 30,000 black bears in northern Florida. And that's not, the land mass isn't that large. And we talked about this too, but the number one predator of a newborn fawn is a black bear. They're just and there's areas there that, like, they simply don't have deer. People don't even, it's become a like, well, I don't hunt deer anymore. We don't see them, we don't have them. And in some of those areas, their deer they're smaller than, if you're looking at a Nebraska or Kansas and Wisconsin or Minnesota deer. You're looking at smaller deer, so they're just not doing it. But to answer your question, Nina, I would say put more pressure. That's easy for me to say, but it's something that it can be a domino effect. If you get your buddies to understand what it's going to take, it might not happen tomorrow, it might not happen next year, but eventually maybe our kids can be able to hunt down there and not have to worry about there's nothing around here because black bears and hogs wiped them all out.
Right. It provides more opportunity for the state, for people in the state, people out of the state, people who want to travel there. It, let them hunt black bears.
Yes. Yeah. And then other southeast states, it's tough. But what I would recommend to people, and I should have gotten to this before, was you really need to rethink your harvest strategies. I'm not saying put away your guns and stop killing does, but what you need to really do is look at your property specifically and just stop going into that, shoot them all like God sort them out mentality, which a lot of people had, where it's like, oh, they're giving me 15 tags, I'm going to fill them all. You can't. This is like from City Slickers, a movie that was a million years ago, but Curly was the old cowboy, and he died, and Billy Crystal said he ate bacon every day. You can't do that, And it's the same thing with does. You can't sit there and hunt a small property and fill all your doe tags at the state. The state's giving you the tags. They don't know where you're hunting. They don't know you're just hunting a 40-acre parcel. If I'm hunting a 40-acre parcel, I'm killing one, maybe two. And the other thing is aside from the numbers, what I talked about, age structure, really educate yourself on that. So if you're going to kill a doe or two, I highly suggest what I've been doing the past, and I know I'm guilty as everybody else. When those first years came along 25 years ago, I was killing every doe that came out, and of course I was waiting for the big one. Big mama doe, yeah, it's bigger, more meat, What I would suggest is shooting those yearling does. And then also, I know this is controversial, but doe fawns, much smaller deer, you're going to get about up here, you're getting I know people in the southeast are going to do this because they're much smaller, but if you're in the upper Midwest or the north, you get a doe fawn in November, the thing's 65, 75 pounds. Smaller, yes. I mean, our mature does are 115, 120 on a good day, field dressed. A nice doe, but okay, go kill two fawns or kill a yearling and a fawn. You have to reprogram yourself because the ones you want to keep are the good mothers. So that harvestable surplus are going to be the younger ones. So that's where you should reprogram your thinking. If you're still going out and you're trying to improve your fawning rates. Improving your fawning rates would be leaving those old matriarchs alone. Don't kill those big old does, and satisfy your venison affliction by saying, yeah, I can kill one or two does. Or you hopscotch properties. It's like, I've got a property here, I've got a little property over there. I'll go shoot a yearling doe there. I'll shoot a yearling doe here. I've got enough venison to last me for a while, and hopefully I'm going to shoot a buck, and we're all going to be good. Most people, I know some of us kill more than a couple, but most people, if they get 2 or 3 deer, that's plenty. I know that's plenty for This episode is also brought to you by GameHide. At GameHide, the philosophy is pretty simple. Design the best products with the best fabrics and features to help you be more successful in the field. While doing this, they strive to keep their pricing moderate to give you the best value in the hunting clothing industry. I wear the Elimitic line of clothing to keep those nasty ticks off of me, and I absolutely love it. Check them out at GameHide.com. I'm going to wrap this up with, we talked about identifying, we talked about what can be done, we talked about the problems and the long-lasting effects. How do you actually monitor, because I know it's kind of a scientifically geeky topic. How do you monitor fawn recruitment? How do you even know what your fawn recruitment is? You really don't, but there's 3 ways that you can get an idea. The best way, which we're not going to be able to do, is through lactation rates. So what the biologists do when when in places where you used to have to do mandatory registration, which I know a couple places still do, but what they would do is they would do a cross section. They'd say, okay, we're going to check the first 100 does that come in for registration, and they would check during gun season. So like in most places, this is later in the year. If that doe, and they would take adult does 2.5 years old or older, so they would age their teeth. If those does were still lactating during gun season, that means they at least brought one fawn to 6 months old. And if you ever thought about it, that's why we have the hunting seasons that we have. The hunting seasons that we have are primarily based off of lactation rates on does, as far as like here in Wisconsin, September, it's the third week or second Saturday in September. They get to September, just say 17th, those fawns are already weaned for all intents and purposes. That doe's still going to be lactating, but the fawn's weaned. So if that doe is still lactating in November, which she will be if that fawn's still alive, that fawn's going to be with her. That's how they monitor. That's the best way of monitoring it. But obviously we can't do that. So what we do as a hunter, if you want to try to figure it out, your own observations. So you know, maybe you're making field notes, which a lot of guys still do. I know that. And through trail camera surveys. So if you got your trail cameras out there, you're going to be able to tell, like, you know, if you have a couple cameras across the property, you're going to be able to tell, like, for a good estimate, how many does you have and how many fawns they have with them. So if you're seeing, and you'd say, well, that's way too simple. Believe me, like around here right now, even though we have high fawn recruitment rates where we live, there is a much larger than I've ever seen in the 30 years I've lived here, a very high percentage of yearling does with no fawns, which is very unusual for this area of the country. Now, I know if we would take that and go to, and that's just, like I said, that's observational, quote unquote, research. If we went to one of those southern states, I bet you it's really high. I bet you there's guys that are seeing doe after doe after doe with no fawns. And that's, you know, so is that the be all end all, saying, well, no, we're not going to kill any does this year? Not necessarily, but it might be giving, if you're thinking about it and you're observing it, it might be giving you pause to what I just talked about, as far as, okay, instead of just going out there, guns and bows a-blazing, and crossbows, maybe we should sit down and think about this. Because I bet you there's a lot of guys in hunting camps that have never had this conversation, that have never said, how many does should we kill this year? You know, a lot of guys might laugh at that. They might say, well, I'm going to kill as many as I see. You might want to think about it if you're part of a bigger hunting lease or whatever, or if you and your family, you might just come up with a plan. You don't have to get all weird about it, but you could say, you know what, guys, we're not seeing a lot of deer. Our sightings are less. We want to do something about this. Maybe we should just put a soft number out there saying, whatever it is. I don't know your property, but maybe we should only kill 2 or 3 or 5 or 6 or 10 or how many big your property is. But actually try to do that math and say, yeah, let's start there and then see if things improve next year. That's something that I would suggest, especially now. 25 years ago, we were saying kill them all. Right now, there's areas, and I know people are going to agree with me, there's areas where they're feeling it and they're saying something. They might not even said it, but they might be thinking like something needs to be done because something doesn't seem right here. How do we fix it? That's the last question. That's the $1 million question. I don't think we fix it overnight. I think all the things we talked about are things you have to incorporate in your deer management plan to help improve not only fawn recruitment on your property, but just deer hunting in general. Because that's what we all want. We all want better deer hunting. I know everybody wants bigger bucks and things like that. That'll take care of itself if we manage the habitat and we manage the number of deer that are on the property. So I think I've basically talked until I couldn't talk no more. Is there anything that I left that is leaving you a question, Ian?
You are the biggest deer geek I know personally.
I'll take that as a compliment, and I'll wear it as a badge of honor.
That is all.
Okay, if you guys have questions on this, please write them in the comments. Wherever you're listening to this podcast or watching this podcast, we read them. It's between Ian, myself, Mac, David, Sarah. There's a bunch of Chris. We have a bunch of people in this office who are monitoring our pages, whether it's on social media or the podcast platforms. So ask the questions. We'll try to answer them as quickly as possible right there on the platform for you. And until next week, join us again for another episode of Deer Talk Now, and be sure to like and subscribe to wherever you're listening or watching this podcast. Deer Talk Now is brought to you by 10-Point Crossbow Technologies. Whether I'm in a tree stand, ground blind, or spot and stalk hunting, I know the Nitro 505 is up to any challenge. Check one out at a dealer near you or log on to 10pointcrossbows.com for more information.